Today, I'd like to introduce James Hamet. He is the founder and CEO of Vistim Labs. James has previous experience as a founder and technology architect at Neurable. He spent about 4.5 years there. James obtained a BS in electrical and electronics engineering from the University of Michigan. So, James, could you tell us your story? I gave a short introduction, but we'd love to hear a bit more about your journey and about your background.
Yeah, of course. Happy to share. So I'm a entrepreneur pretty much by just the nature of my upbringing. I used to make video games back when you could still make games that would be almost as good as what we have on the phones. I would make games and trade them around at school with my classmates. I was about 13, 14 when I was doing this, and it made me inspired to start building more and more things. One of the things that I learned while building video games is how to make artificial intelligences. Originally, they would be small and simple, right? The most basic form of AI is an AI that can make logical decisions in a game. But then that since became something more sophisticated. So in college, I started looking at ways to make AI to improve people's health, to understand what they were thinking, to understand what they wanted in their life. I started building, for example, an AI that could tell a paralyzed person where they wanted to go, and control the wheelchair that way so that they didn't, necessarily need to move with their legs or their arms. And that's since evolved into AI for diagnostics and for practicing medicine.
That seems like an awesome journey. Can you remember like the first AI that you had a chance to develop back in the video game days?
Wow, no one's asked me that question in a long time. Let's see. I actually did some, recently around the winter holidays. I revisited some of those games that I used to make. I mean, they're not good by modern standards, but probably one of my first AIs would have been, I made like a bit of a risk simulator, and so I made an AI that would compete against you as the player. So, you would put your armies out on the world and try to conquer territories, and the AI would respond to that. First, the AI was pretty stupid, right? It would play by very basic rules. And in order to make the game more engaging and more fun, one of the things that I actually experimented a bit with was how to make the AI somewhat unpredictable. So that even me, the person who wrote the code, I couldn't always know what its master plan was. And so that's one of my early, versions of an AI. When it became more sophisticated and it started to have memory, that's when I started making games more like, 20 questions. I was able to make like a Minesweeper game. That one's not totally AI, but I had it learn based on the person's patterns and, make the game more difficult. So things of that nature.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I'm sure, being able to build these games and kind of share them around the school, it seems like it really sparked an entrepreneurial streak in you and an entrepreneurial excitement. And so, as you mentioned, you eventually turned these activities both in terms of technology and entrepreneurship towards more of like a medicine, neuroscience direction. And so what initially sparked your interest in pursuing that space, your involvement in neuroscience and neurotechnology?
Yeah, so there's a longer answer there. Part of it has to do with my upbringing. My parents are both physicians, so I've always been drawn to medicine and also to just the needs of the patients. One aspect of that has been really thinking about the needs of the clinician, right? A clinician, a doctor is pretty much like a detective when they're trying to figure out what's wrong with you. They're also a detective when they're trying to treat your conditions because they're really just trying things to see what works, right? And they need the participation from the patient, and sometimes they even need participation from the family members to get it right. So that upbringing pushed me in that direction just initially on its own. I started to then read books about people suffering from different conditions. Some of my favorite books actually are autobiographies written by fully paralyzed patients. They had to type the autobiography by looking at an alphabet and blinking when they saw the letter they liked, and the nurse would actually have to write down letter by letter what they were trying to say. And it just made me realize that we're all living these very full and complex lives, and you can use technology to help make that a little bit more possible. One technology that I'm a very big fan of, even though it's very old and primitive, right, is the glasses. You, your vision, your eyesight, your ability to see the world is something that's, I think, in a way now it's a fundamental aspect to being human. It's very hard to imagine somebody who's blind, and so I've found those technologies particularly interesting. Um, and well, just as a result of that, I started thinking, well, if you can make glasses, and with glasses now, people who, essentially would not be able to see quite as well, now they can live lives as if they had no blindness and no, nearsightedness, farsightedness. It really levels the playing field in a way that I think is beautiful. It's not, sorry, levels the playing field is one way to look at it. The main way I look at it really is just agency. I remember when my sister put on glasses for the first time, and she's got to have been like 15 or so. It was pretty late that she got them. And I remember she cried because she saw leaves and trees, and she thought trees didn't have leaves. She thought they were just cotton balls. And, what is a leaf? Or where does this thing come from that's on the ground? And it really made me open my mind to just how simple it can be to give someone just a more complete life. The word that I like to summarize that as agency. So agency is a core to all of my activities, ways to improve human agency, ways to give people more freedom in their life, more control of their life. And most of that comes down to, what you can and can't do, physical limitations. I'd say that, blindness is a very important problem to me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems like an incredible mission that you're on, kind of to help improve agency for people. And that moment that you mentioned about your sister first putting the glasses on and kind of getting to see the world in a much clearer sense for the first time, it really resonated with me. And so the next thing I had to ask you was about the company that you're currently working on, Vistim Labs. You mentioned this mission that you have to kind of help improve the agency for people using technology. Through that lens, can you tell us, the founding story of Vistim Labs, and then also what inspired you to work specifically at this intersection of AI and dementia screening?
Yeah, so it's a convergence of a lot of things. I lost my grandma to Alzheimer's, and she was mismanaged, diagnosed for the better part of a decade until she passed. And I had a personal mission to better understand this. My father's a neuroradiologist, and so I already knew what we do in terms of diagnosing the brain and in terms of imaging it and trying to understand it, separately to this. So that those are two different points, right? Personal motivation from my family, but also, my father being a big influence on me. The third would actually be sort of serendipitous. I had created a mind-controlled wheelchair when I was in college, and I turned that into a company called Neurable, which I've since left. One of the things we were working on at Neurable, of course, is how do you read information from the brain, and how do you make it useful information, like telling it that somebody wants to move forward when they're paralyzed. The way that we came up with that technology was rather novel. It was we got a patent for it. But one of the ways that it worked is I would show arrows to people on an iPad, and I would look at how their brains responded to the arrows. One of the things that I theorized was someone's response would be modulated by brain damage. If they have some level of brain damage, maybe they don't process the shape fully. And that was sort of the founding principle of Vistim. When I had that aha moment, I stepped away from Neurable to pursue this direction. And, lo and behold, there was some fruit there. We found the ability to better understand Alzheimer's conditions. We now have a massive 250 patient study with the University of Miami to study this effect in Parkinson's and in Lewy body disease. And what we're finding is that, the way that your brains process reality all around you is actually a very high precise indicator of the degree of brain damage, but also, potentially the cause of the brain damage, the disease that may be inflicting that damage. So that is those are the three areas that led me. Personal, family, and then also just right place, right time, having an idea and sharing that idea to the right people.
Well, I'm really glad to see you working, in this space and on this problem. And I know one of the things that you mentioned is this kind of aha moment that you had while working with
Yeah.
Neurable with regards to do the people with damage to the brain process these arrow images differently. And is there anything else from your time at Neurable that has helped inform your current journey or your current work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Everything that you do teaches you something, and you know, I have the good fortune of essentially always being an entrepreneur, um, always being able to practice what I believe and test my hypotheses, which really it's a privilege. It's very fun. I've learned how to make mistakes, how to test hypotheses and be proven wrong. I would say if I were to be specific with Neurable, I learned a lot of lessons there, especially how to run a business, how to get it off the grounds. Neurable was my first venture-backed business. My other businesses have all mostly been, bootstrapped. Bootstrapping is what I'm more familiar with, just because of, just the nature of how I've built things. But working with venture has been particularly illuminating because there's a bit of a political lens that it puts on the business. You're not just satisfying your customers; you now also have these shareholders who have their own interests. You have to attract more of them, and I would say that the biggest growth coming out of Neurable for me has really been exploring that. Once you have venture backing, it's pretty easy to get more of it. But to start a business and to get more investors on that is always, something that's a little bit of a problem specific challenge. And so I've really just been learning how to speak to these investors a little bit more, how to build businesses in a way that they appreciate more, because they're more focused on exits, which is another thing. They're not as interested in cash-based businesses. I think it's a little ironic, but their goal is to put the money in and get the money out very quickly. So, a business with a lot of dividends is not going to be the type of business that most investors are looking for. So those are a couple things. Now, if I think about the science, Neurable was also the first time that we applied for and successfully got an SBIR grant. So I also learned a lot about the grant writing process, and I mean the list goes on and on. That was my biggest learning experience so far, excluding Vistim, where we're also learning quite rapidly and doing some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like that really comes with the startup environment. You got to be learning quickly and moving quickly. And so another question I had as follow-up to some of those learnings that you mentioned, what would you say are some of the key pros and cons of following this venture path that you and the team have begun to follow here? Yeah,
So you're asking me to highlight some more differences?
that'd be great.
Okay, sure. And it sounds like maybe advantages too. I would say that there are lots of advantages with working with VC. One of them is that you get a ton of advice, and the process of raising money with VCs is extremely slow. And part of that, the main reason for that is it's iterative. You need to get your story right. You need to get all of your finances together. You need to really have a solid strategy in advance. And for someone like me, it is a little frustrating to go through this learning curve because I'm so used to being a bit more of an operator CEO. I'm used to getting customers and building a product and iterating on feedback from my customers, right? When you're dealing with VCs, the thing that I don't about it is you have to do all this prep work and all this planning that honestly is going to end up changing significantly while you're running your business. I do think that there's advantages though. The advantages come with, a little bit better foresight, right? Because you've developed a plan in advance of executing on it. The advantages also come with, a little bit more maturity with your business. You get a lot of advice. It's easier to find mentors, I would say. Easier to get warm introductions to people when you have VC, even if they're not investors. They're still, looking at your business, asking you questions, introducing you to other people. It can move faster because now you also have, you have potentially a capital infusion. You potentially have an investor putting money into your company, and then you can deploy that money more quickly than if you had to wait for your customers to sort of catch up in what they pay you. So it's really a mixed bag. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other, but if you were to ask me what I personally prefer, that's also a hard question. Right now, it's VC, just because I do enjoy developing strategies. When I was developing bootstrap companies, I always started with the strategy. So that part wasn't new to me. And I like having all the feedback. I like having multiple eyes on what I'm building. The validation, of course, is very nice to have. It's emotionally gratifying. But then on top of that, I think that once you get something right, you just get to make a bigger splash. Bootstrap is definitely a longer path, even though, on the short term, it might seem faster. So you'll have faster access to customers, faster revenue. Iterating is still the name of the game. That's the number one skill. So you get to practice that more in a bootstrap environment. But if once you're in my shoes, once you've like done this a couple times, you would rather move faster, right? Once you have a solid plan and it's going to work, it's nice to be able to just hire people and get it done.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from there. Definitely both some pros and some cons. And I think you're at a very nice spot where you're able to kind of, having been through a bootstrapped situation as well as venture situations, you're able to really understand what it's like following each path.
I should mention the biggest drawback to VC is that, your VC, your investors, whether they're VC or not, your investors who join you are going to shape the company. They're going to have opinions, and those opinions, honestly, they have merit in every case because, you have a fiduciary duty if you're running the company to, respect what the investors are asking for. If they own a small percentage, then, you can ignore that a little bit. But to a greater extent, it's important to recognize that your shareholders are, in a sense, buying into the family that is your company, and they are just as important as your employees. I think anyone who's involved in your business is a partner in your business, and especially if they're investing their money. So it's, for better or for worse, I think it's a good decision to put that money to work in the ways that they advise. Especially if they're giving you some funds and they have a specific goal in mind, it's good to attempt that goal and see where it takes you. In many cases, no one person is smarter than a group of people. So in many cases, these investors can come together and they can come up with some really great ideas.
It's also important for the founder to really make sure that they match with the VC, because as you mentioned, if a VC is buying into your company, they're kind of becoming part of that family, becoming part of that team. And I think that's a really important thing for like the founder and maybe the executive team to take into account as well.
Definitely.
And so to make a pivot a bit more to the technical side of things and get into the weeds here, I was wondering if you could give us a quick summary of the Vistim Labs like product or technology. What exactly does it do, and how does it work to help identify dementia using AI?
Yeah, so originally the goal of this technology was to make it easier to diagnose patients. However, now that I've been in this space for a while, I've learned that the single biggest shortcoming in the neurology space is essentially creating these individual treatment plans for patients. In neurology, you have so many different types of conditions, and they all cause, in many ways, the same symptoms. A lot of people don't realize that Parkinson's also causes memory impairment similar to Alzheimer's. The main difference really is just Parkinson's also affects motor first. So these diseases are in many ways difficult to disambiguate. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, it's a family of conditions. So understanding which type of Alzheimer's someone has is a challenge. What our business does. What our business does is it actually monitors the changes that someone experiences as a result of their therapy. And we use AI in order to make sure that the patient gets the right therapy. That's what we're doing in a nutshell. So if you have a patient and you're treating them for, let's say it's Lewy body dementia, you're trying out different therapies, you need to know which one works. There aren't any options today to know for sure. So the patient of today, they'll get their pill, they'll head home. Most of these medications, they affect symptoms because that's all we can see right now. That's all we can see the symptoms, whether they improve or not. We're adding a new layer to that, where we can see how neurons are becoming more active. We're seeing how neuron pathways are losing or gaining greater integrity, right? They're either becoming stronger connections or weaker connections. And that's how we know that the therapy is working. And one of the things that's really powerful about our technology is that we've been able to use AI to correlate what we're building to things like amyloid and tau, which are biomarkers that you normally collect from a spinal tap. These days, there's some blood tests coming out that have amyloid and tau, which are very exciting. But we still need to know if the treatment is working. And so fundamentally, that's what we do. And in the future, we'll be able to even on the spot, following a certain cadence of therapy, recommend to the doctor, some different treatment pathways. Maybe it's time to combine another therapy with the one the patient's already receiving. And we can really use numbers to our advantage here to make sure that the patient has the best possible outcome.
That really does sound like a powerful way to apply this AI and to apply this knowledge. I think that it can end up being really useful for the patients, as you mentioned, to be able to differentiate what sort of dementia they have earlier and avoid more of these misdiagnoses, and then to also be following the correct treatment plan that would fit better with the way that their brain is behaving. And so earlier in our call, you had mentioned some collaborations, I believe with a couple academic centers. And then as I was doing some research online, I also saw that the Vistim Labs technologies has been featured in some peer-reviewed research. And so I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more detail about Vistim's involvement in the academia or research space.
Yeah, sure. So, if you're building a tool that measures how well things work, then naturally you're going to want to be helping researchers developing things that are good, like treatments. So, I typically reach out to these universities. I share what we're working on. And the really cool thing is to see the feedback. This is definitely this is not an easy technology, right? This isn't a phone app. This isn't a real estate business. The researchers are the ones who are the key opinion leaders of the field. They're the ones who are essentially guiding the advancement of technology. And so I always try to start there with the researchers. They don't have money like investors do. So, my conversations with investors haven't been quite as fruitful. But, when I talk to the researchers, it's the same process. You're showing them what you have and you're talking to them. They love what we have because, well, I pointed out the problem. If you're developing a treatment, and most of these medicals are, how do you know if it's working? And you really don't have other options besides looking directly at someone's symptoms, which is noisy and unreliable. And so now we have this new method, which has a clear link to symptoms, which is more precise and shows even small differences between people who might even experience the same symptoms, so you otherwise can't disambiguate them. And so, the type of research that we do is we support these researchers who are trying to better understand these diseases, who are developing therapies. And one of the really nice things is that they typically invite us to their study. They ask to use the technology, and in exchange for the data and the rights to publish, we're happy to comply. And so we get this huge access to the community and this great growing of data for our AI. AIs are all based on data. And we work with some fantastic partners. So in the past, University of Miami is our most recent, but in the past, we've worked with Columbia Medical School, LMU Munich. I've personally worked with a couple other universities all around the world, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, it seems like a really symbiotic relationship going on here where you're able to get this technology in the hands of researchers or universities, allowing them to get, for example, this higher fidelity feedback that rather than just looking at symptoms, kind of pairing that with them looking at symptoms, and then your team is able to get this data and be able to help build more robust models. And so very symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, right, the research group is essentially an investor in a way because they're giving us data. And the data that we get from these groups are worth millions of dollars. The data that we get is probably, from one deal is worth probably more money than I'm raising in my current round. So
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from there. Especially in a company like this, and especially in this day and age, like sometimes data is the most important currency, the most important thing to have, sometimes even more important than money. Are there any competitors working in the same or similar space? And if so, what differentiates Vistim from these competitors?
yeah, that's a good question too. So who are we competing with and what makes us different? Well, let's see. That's a big question. Technically, we are competing with the amyloid test that's coming out just because of what our technology can do. However, it truly is like a blue ocean in the sense of no one is really monitoring effects of therapy as it relates to the brain. We have competitors that look at how people are talking and use AI to process voice to try to figure out, some signs of disease. We have competitors that look at eye movements and try to, figure out what type of disease the person has based on their eye movements. There's a company that I really like in Ireland that's looking at eye twitching. That I could tell you a lot more about that, but it's a friend's business, so I know a bit about it. A lot of these companies are looking at symptomatic effects. What makes us new and novel is that we're looking at the underlying integrity of these neuron pathways. So we'll have a picture that'll be designed to target a specific pathway in the brain, and we're going to look to see if that pathway has indeed been triggered by the picture that we show. And if it hasn't, there's a couple reasons why. We might have an adjacent pathway that's doing the work, right? Because the primary pathway has been damaged. We might have a pathway that is correctly doing the work, but we can see electrically that the neurons have started to degrade, that the quality of the work is not very good anymore. We can also see that maybe the quality is getting better. And so those are just a couple things to really highlight, what makes us new. There are other technologies that show images to people and look at how their brains are responding. But we're pursuing a patent for this concept of showing different types of images and looking at the specific pathways. The competitors who show an image, usually it's just one image, black and white, a ball or nothing, right? Or a black screen. And they're looking at what's called attention. They're looking to see if the person, essentially their reaction speed. They're looking to see, did they see the thing or not? Which is very fundamentally different from what we're doing. So the closest competitors, people who are also maybe looking electrically at the brain, either the person has their eyes closed the whole time and they're just trying to look at what's called general connectivity, how well are neurons connected just in general. But that has some challenges because, every time you put that device on, even for the same patient, you're going to get different readings. But then you also have companies where, they're looking at EEG with a picture that shows up and looking at reaction time. And to me, that's also somewhat of a simplification of what these diseases are. What I think is the crux of our technology, and it's what we're defending the most with our patent strategy, is specifically, triggering the different pathways for one reason only, really. And that reason is it gives us localization data. localization, knowing where the brain is being damaged, that's the only way really of knowing what type of disease this is. And as a result, that's the only way of knowing which treatment is the best treatment option for your patient. So that's what sets us apart in the greatest amount of detail that I can share right now.
Yeah, totally understandable. I'm sure there's some proprietary things that may not be the best fit for a podcast at this point, but I appreciate you kind of sharing at that level of detail, and I totally see where you're coming from. How it kind of is a blue ocean state right now, where it seems that you're the only company really working on this exact thing and in this general way, and a lot of the other companies are kind of approaching things from tangential or diagonal directions to this. And it's definitely nice to kind of be in that blue ocean and be able to explore from there. To follow up on some of our early conversation, I think you mentioned that Vistim is looking to be analyzing not only Alzheimer's, for example, but Parkinson's and Lewy body, and I think you may have even mentioned another indication or two. And what's next in the short term for Vistim?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are starting with Alzheimer's. Our product is the one that we're going to market with is an Alzheimer's product. It monitors changes in Alzheimer's disease. Once we complete the Miami study, then now we'll be able to look at potentially changes in Parkinson's and Lewy body disease as well. So that's what we're looking for. That's what's exciting to us. The next step really is going to be establishing ourselves as a disease differentiator. Once we do that, then we'll be fundamentally different, not just from a technology perspective, right? But from a strategic perspective, we'll be fundamentally different. Amyloid and some of these other, biomarkers, like I mentioned before, it's difficult to assess differences. For example, my friend with the really cool company looking at your eye twitching, it's a good sense of knowing that the brain has been damaged, but by what? And so that's what I'm most excited for. I would say that once we complete this Miami study, the next step for me is going to be, looking for more indications to go into: traumatic brain injuries, vascular dementia. There's a whole, suite of these neurodegenerative conditions that I'd love to investigate. Traumatic brain injury is probably the next one after Parkinson's. And we're going to release these products gradually, disease-specific products. Once we can differentiate these diseases, then we can actually make new claims. Now that once we're able to differentiate diseases, then now our product also can be a prescription tool. It can now prescribe the treatment because it can tell you what the patient is suffering from. And so that's where it unlocks this new strategy of being able to be an AI that essentially guides therapy, not just from a feedback perspective of, what's working, what's not, but also from a feed forward perspective, what might work and what might not work.
Got it. And so each step in this path kind of unlocks new steps or new horizons that the company may be able to move into or be able to help out.
Correct. That's the secret of all business, right? It's momentum, and it's leverage. It's figuring out where you want to go, right? Where's your end goal, and figuring out what you can leverage today to get there. And so I always find it helpful to build, like a step-by-step, like a staircase pathway to where you want to go. And sometimes, you really should do both, work down, work up, and try to figure out all the steps in between. Because, you might find that there's a step that you can't yourself cross, right? And that's how you know which partners to bring in. That's how you know how much capital you might need, right? If the step is small enough that you can achieve it with your own resources, then you're golden. But you want to make sure that you know those steps as well as you can. It's the hardest part of the game, especially if you miss a step, right? If you realize you could have leveraged something, right, that would have made your path faster, more efficient, then you lose a little bit of capital efficiency, and capital efficiency is key. You're not going to get all the money that you need to build your business in general. You're not going to get a blank check. So, you have to figure out how to make that money really go as far as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you got to figure out how to stretch those dollars farther than you would have thought, and yeah, that capital efficiency point is super important. I agree with that. You've mentioned a bit about business strategy and thinking about the strategy in advance, and so to the extent you're able to talk about it or that you're able to share, do you have a long-term vision for Vistim Lab? Maybe after you complete some of these new indications and get clearance for some of these new indications, what would you like to see out of the company in the longer term?
Yes. So let's time box longer term. Building an AI that looks at the patient, knows what disease that they have, suggests therapies. By the way, it will never replace the doctor, but it's a companion to the doctor, right? So the doctor still makes the decision, but it's going to suggest some therapies. Then the doctor can figure out, well, which one's best for my patient based on their medical history. Because that's always a little bit more subjective, right? Like, what might the patient be allergic to or have adverse reactions to? What is their lifestyle? Some treatments require you being in the clinic, and maybe the person can't afford to do that all the time. So, those are going to be some details that I don't think we necessarily need AI for, and I think they require a human touch. But anyway, I'm just pointing out that so this can become a sidekick to the doctor, right? Quickly know what the patient is suffering from, quickly identify some possible treatments. All treatments pretty much have some level of side effect. Walk through those options with the patient. Hey, if I put you on this treatment, then this is what the Vistim AI is predicting your outcome will be. You'll have this amount of memory restored. You'll have this cognitive function restored, or at least preserved. And so that's where I want to take this company in the next 7 to 10 years, 7 being optimistic. But if I were to look a little bit beyond that, I would like this company also to be treating patients. When I say treating patients, what I mean there is we have these technologies now that are adaptive. We have transcranial magnetic stimulation, near infrared light. Imagine if the AI could not only provide these options to the doctor so that they're easy to anticipate the results of and easy to just see quickly, but it could also help the doctor in the sense of modifying the treatment over time. So maybe you want to give a patient a certain dose of TMS, and the AI can actually help with that dosage plan, and actually maybe be administering the technology. So TMS is non-invasive. You're using magnetism into the brain. We could tell with AI, basically, we could tell the magnets where to focus on. And that's a bit of the longer version of this. There is a possibility, and this is going in the direction of, is it possible? There is a possibility that the images we show on the screen could also be therapeutic. It's a direction that I don't explore too often just because of how exploratory it is. But I think that there would be a way to show specific images to patients to revitalize certain neuron pathways, and get those neurons to basically survive a little longer, potentially even strengthen those neuron connections. And so that's something that I'm very interested by. And hopefully we get the chance to pursue that direction. But it would be experimental at best, and it's hard to say right now where that would go. But what I can say for now is, as part of dementia therapies, we actually already use a lot of stimulation techniques. We'll play music that the person knows, usually music from their childhood or early adulthood. We'll have them do painting and other things like this that engage them. And there's definitely is a therapeutic angle for sensory stimulation, making them feel like they're in different environments, reminding their sense of smell of all these different things that they've experienced. Those are definitely proven ways to keep people alive longer. And one of the main reasons is, and this is obvious to me, but one of the main reasons that this technology works already is because of the memories that it elucidates. So you might have a very strong emotional response to a smell that reminds you of childhood, and then it reminds you of your mom, and you end up with a stronger desire to live. You end up with a greater purpose with being alive. Those types of things, you could call it a placebo effect, but they make people live longer. There's a really nice study that I'm sure you've read about the effect of just having someone in the hospital room with you, like a family member, versus having no one visit. And you can imagine the mortality rate without a person. The acceleration is something like 300% to death. So there's clearly something powerful here about feeling attached to the world and connected.
Yeah, there really is something powerful here. And it seems like there's really exciting times ahead for Vistim. And, I'm really excited about that long-term vision that you have, and rooting for you and the team, and definitely hoping to see all the aspects of this come to fruition. And did you have any advice for students or young professionals aiming to work in the field of neurotech? I know you've approached this field from an entrepreneurship perspective, and so that might be a good way to frame your advice. Like, if there's somebody who has an entrepreneurial excitement or an entrepreneurial background, do you have any tips on how they can kind of channel that towards neurotech?
Yeah. One thing I want to say is that it's a very tough field. If you want to pursue this direction, be sure that that's what you want to do. It's growing, especially, there are more investors now than there were before. There's new innovations now. It's definitely ripe for innovation, and it's very interesting and exciting. Finding opportunities is a little challenging just because of the limitations of current technology. The neurotech businesses have typically struggled to find footing and find repeat customers. So it's something to know about the field. It's definitely more of a deep tech space. It's definitely, you have to be wanting to build this thing for patients. If you want to go in this direction and you want to, work in neuro, I would say, familiarize yourself as best as you can. Most of the people that I know in neuro, they are passionate, and their passion comes from, meeting patients, from reading scientific articles, even though they don't have a PhD, just to familiarize themselves with what's going on. And passion always overcomes, all other barriers. So you don't necessarily need a PhD or an MD to be in this space. And in fact, I would say that most of the people in this space probably don't have that background. That said, experience is everything. If you really want to get your foot in the door, then, try to build something. There's a good friend of mine, Connor Rusomo, who started a company called OpenBCI. So anyone at this point can, I mean, you got to have a little bit of money, but anyone can buy electrodes and start to look at your brain. And EEG is the most accessible form, so that's where a lot of people start. But don't limit yourself there. Look at the cool technologies like near infrared light. Look at magnetic. Look at ultrasounds. There's definitely a lot of cool things happening in our space, and as long as you follow them, you'll find an opportunity.
Yeah, there really are a lot of cool things happening, and it seems like the space is just ever expanding, especially these last few years. There's lots of new interesting algorithms coming into the space. There's lots of innovation when it comes to the actual hardware. That there's lots of innovation from the medical side, and I think that's really good advice. Yeah, the part that resonated with me most there was your tip that if you want to get involved, sometimes it's all about experience, and the best thing to do might just to hop in and try to start building something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, applying some of my bootstrap iterative learning background there. Yeah, two different ways to get in. The other one is go get a PhD and study with someone who knows their space well and who can teach you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so we discussed your long-term vision for Vistim Labs. Do you have any predictions for the long term of the field of neurotechnology as a whole, for example? And I guess to time box this maybe over the next 20 years or so.
Mhm. Um, well, in the next 20 years, I think a lot of these diseases we're suffering from, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, epilepsy. I think that a lot of these conditions are going to be treated, and they're going to be treated quite effectively. I'm very optimistic and bullish that we can even get these diseases to go away. Um, it it's not necessarily profitable for them to go away, so that's going to be a challenge to my prediction. That's one very big factor that may drag things on. But that said, I do think it's eventual and it's near term that these diseases will be prevented, just because we're learning so much about the brain so quickly. And just in my experience, a lot of these diseases actually come down to very basic metabolics. There's a big part of a lot of Alzheimer's patients actually have a form of diabetes, and that's what causes their memory loss. So um, there's there's some good companies that are finally, aware of that and applying, diabetic solutions to Alzheimer's. And so that's a bit of my prediction that we'll start to see those conditions start to be better addressed. If we look past 20 years, I do look forward to the day where memory can be something that you can have better control over. What do you remember? What don't you remember? Elon Musk, when he started Neuralink, he was always talking about being able to download skills. I'm very interested in that, and I think it's potentially possible, but that would probably take another 10 years or so. But that said, another technology that I'm excited for and haven't seen yet is the concept of just the AI helper. I'm thinking of a contact lens in your eye that puts an augmented reality vision for you, and it communicates with you through electrical activity from your eye, and it knows if you want to click on something, if you don't want to click on something. I mean, this is going back to my days at Neurable. That was always my dream of what we were building, and beyond the patient, right? And that was, back then we thought it would take 100 years. Now, at the earliest, 30 years, but that's stretching it a bit. I'd say that's probably within the 50-year range. Things move quickly. I think I'll see that technology in my lifetime.
Yeah, it sounds like there's exciting times ahead, and I'm optimistic about some of these same things that you are, and I hope your prediction is right about these diseases either being much better treated by this point, or maybe even eradicated. I think that would be amazing for the world, amazing for society. Some of these other technologies that you mentioned, for example, being able to have more control over memories or download skills, or even have this sort of assistant applied on top of the world, some sort of AR assistant, that seems like it could be really cool and really the next generation in the way that we as humans process or interact with the world around us, or with data. This last generation we saw the internet really changed the game, and maybe that's kind of the next step, is having some sort of assistant kind of in our eye. But yeah, I don't think I have anything else specific to ask you about before we logged off. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you'd like to mention or bring up?
It's a good question. Not necessarily. I would say that if you're interested by this space, if you're interested by what we talked about today, then feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm on LinkedIn. My email is my first and last name at gmail.com. So yeah, easy to find, easy to talk to, and collaboration is key.